The Mosasaurus, arguably one of the most famous marine reptiles to ever exist, is often imagined as a dominant force of prehistoric oceans. But beyond its reputation and fossil record lies an intriguing question. Could such a marine reptile realistically survive in the modern day world? G'day everybody, I hope you're doing well, and as the title obviously stated, today we'll be exploring how the Mosasaurus would do in our modern day 7 seas. As always, we will break this down into 3 areas to cover, this being environmental survivability, dietary suitability, and resistance to threats and competition. These will be scored out of 10 before being summed up into an ultimate survival score. Also, I will not be including humans as a part of this analysis as I think it takes away from the ocean's natural state. If you enjoy these sorts of videos, then make sure to like and subscribe, and let us begin. Mosasaurus hoffmanni is the species of mosasaur that we'll be covering today. It is among the largest and most formidable of the mosasaurids known from the late Cretaceous period. Fossil remains discovered suggest that this species was certainly large. Most people place them around 12 to 14 meters or 39 to 45 feet in length with a weight of over 10 tons. However, some people in the past have suggested more contested and dubious estimates of up to 17 meters or 56 feet in length and a body mass of over 15 tons. However, these are generally thought to be inaccurate or exaggerated sizes, so we'll go with the former. An apex predator of its time, the Mosasaurus possessed a massive hydrodynamically streamlined body and a powerful crescent-shaped fluke similar in structure to that of sharks. This structure provided the thrust necessary for fast ambush-style attacks. Although there is not an exact measurement for its speed, it is generally agreed upon that it could reach around 48 kilometers an hour or 30 miles per hour. The skull of the mosasaur was robust and heavily built, measuring over 1 meter or 3.3 feet in length, with an elongated snout and jaws lined with large teeth that were finely serrated. Bite force estimates vary, but biomechanical reconstructions of related species suggest that it could exert pressures exceeding 10,000 newtons, comparable to that or even surpassing modern day predators. This immense bite force combined with a flexible jaw joint and a secondary row of teeth on the palate allowed it to grip and manipulate struggling prey effectively. Its diet was likely broad and opportunistic. Fossil evidence and tooth wear patterns indicate that it fed on large fish, sharks, cephalopods, ammonites, turtles, and even other marine reptiles. Such versatility along with its sheer size and power positioned hoffmanni as the dominant marine predator of its ecosystem. However, catching prey was easier said than done, as Mosasaurus hoffmanni didn't have an exceptionally large brain, and its other senses such as smell weren't the sharpest in the shed. However, it made up for these weaknesses with greater vision. Mosasaurus likely had binocular vision with a field of view of approximately 28.5 degrees. Being at the top of its food chain, the only real threat to a mature mosasaur came in the form of another of its own kind. Fossil evidence of healed bite marks and punctures matching mosasaur teeth tell the story of brutal confrontations. Fights over territory, dominance, or mates are all likely reasons for such conflict. Yet many of these wounds healed, showing that these battles, while fierce, were often ritualistic rather than fatal. Such resilience reflects a predator well adapted to conflict, capable of surviving immense trauma and continuing to hunt effectively. Altogether, these anatomical and ecological traits makes Mosasaurus hoffmanni one of the most interesting Cretaceous representations to bring into the modern day. So with all that being said, it is time to break down each of our 3 categories, starting off with environmental suitability. When considering Mosasaurus's potential to survive in modern day oceans, environmental compatibility presents both advantages and challenges. The most significant factor would be temperature. While once thought to be cold-blooded, isotopic evidence now suggests that mosasaurs were likely endothermic, maintaining an internal body temperature of around 35 degrees Celsius or 95 degrees Fahrenheit, this being comparable to modern seabirds. This means that it should be good in today's oceans where surface temperatures average around 20 degrees Celsius or 68 degrees Fahrenheit, while they averaged around 25 to 28 degrees Celsius or 77 to 82 degrees Fahrenheit during the Cretaceous. Being endothermic would have allowed mosasaurs to operate efficiently across a wider range of waters than previously assumed. It could tolerate colder conditions, although polar regions would still limit its activity. Warm currents would hold strongholds, offering more suitable temperatures and solid terrain. Another great obstacle would be habitat structure. During the late Cretaceous, much of the world's land was submerged under vast epicontinental seas, this providing broad, shallow environments teeming with life. These regions served as productive feeding and breeding grounds for large marine reptiles. Today's oceans, by contrast, have steeper margins and fewer shallow zones to inhabit. Mosasaurs would likely be be confined to continental shelves, island chains, and upwelling areas where prey remains abundant. At the very least, they would likely prefer to remain in these shallow regions until they reach more comfortable sizes, although there is support by other studies which suggest that mosasaurs may have actually been occasional divers, but of course they would always have to come back to the surface to gain some air. When it comes to oxygen availability, I don't think it would pose too much difficulty. Salinity and ocean chemistry would also present minimal challenges. Modern salinity and pH levels fall within the tolerant ranges for a creature like this, and there is no indication that mosasaurs required unusually specific chemical conditions. While the modern oceans are a bit cooler and less structurally reliable than those of the late Cretaceous, Hoffman's mosasaur's physiology suggests it could adapt well to present-day environments. It could thrive in warm, productive waters and even within cooler ones, although they would still likely avoid the coolest and most barren regions of the sea. This would earn them an environmental suitability score of 7 out of 10. Modern oceans wouldn't be perfect, but they would still offer mosasaurs enough warmth, oxygen, and terrain to be relatively comfortable. Now we move on to dietary suitability, and the dietary adaptability of the mosasaur would likely be one of its greatest assets in the modern ocean, being a key factor in its survival and dominance. As previously stated, fossil evidence from jaw morphology and tooth structure reveals a powerful yet versatile predator capable of crushing, tearing, or swallowing prey whole. As known in its ancient world, the feeding of fish, cephalopods, ammonites, and all that good stuff would easily allow it to adjust into modern day oceans. Tuna, sea turtles, swordfish, marlin would replace its prehistoric prey, while squids and octopuses, even though I like to say octopi more, including larger species such as the Humboldt squid and giant Pacific octopus, would provide easy rewards. Young mosasaurs in particular may also target crabs and lobsters. Along island chains and shallow waters, it would likely ambush seals, sea lions, and small cetaceans including porpoises or young dolphins, taking advantage of their surface-breathing habits. Though I will admit, going ahead and hunting something like a dolphin would be far more difficult, as not only are the dolphins faster and more agile, but highly intelligent with the ability to use echolocation. Mosasaurs would likely not find all too much success picking them off, being lucky with the occasional ambush. Mosasaurs would also scavenge whale carcasses or feed off weakened individuals in distress, a behaviour which is observed in other apex marine predators. And let's be honest, there are not too many current day creatures of the sea that would challenge a 40-foot mosasaur for the rights to a carcass. Even the great white sharks would be bowing out of that. I believe a larger prey option that would not be as dangerous as healthy whales comes in the form of the whale shark. Now don't get me wrong, these animals are large and their pure mass could do some damage. But then again, they are not large enough to shake off a determined mosasaur, and they've been observed to be picked off by killer whales repeatedly. Though not all encounters with prey would be one-sided, some of the ocean's modern-day inhabitants would be capable of testing a mosasaur's ability. A large great white shark or schools of sharks can apply some level of intimidation to a young mosasaur, especially those in contested feeding zones. And if a mosasaur attempted to hunt a pod of pilot whales, it could run into some serious trouble there. There is no way a mature mosasaur would go ahead and try and test its luck against a pod of killer whales, nor against adult sperm whales, humpback whales, and that whole group. Despite these inherent risks, food scarcity would rarely constrain it. Modern oceans are rich in small to mid to large bodied prey, and as a reptile, they are feeding on anything that can fit within their jaws. Also, mosasaurs would likely have a lower metabolic rate than the other mammalian predators. Now, don't get me wrong, it wouldn't be super slow considering they are endothermic, but I would still put them in a greater position than large marine mammals, allowing them to go without food for a little bit of time. Over time, mosasaurs would likely emerge as a stealth-dominant apex predator, occupying an ecological niche between that of great white sharks and orcas. Where others would rely on pure speed, coordination, and intelligence, mosasaurs would likely be a lot like the sharks, focusing on raw power, ambush precision, and energy efficiency, making it a marine reptile that will be feared across the 7 seas. I believe that because of this, the mosasaur earns a dietary suitability score of 8 out of 10. Come on, there is plenty of options that you could go ahead and hunt. Last but not least in the rankings, we have resistance to threats and competition. In a modern day marine ecosystem, the mosasaur would face limited natural threats due to its size, power, and predatory status. As an apex predator, very few animals would be capable of challenging it directly. Its massive and unique frame would make it one of the most imposing predators in the ocean, even by today's standards. The most significant significant competitor would come in the form of large sharks and marine mammals, which currently occupy high trophic positions in ocean food webs. Among these, sharks would likely pose the least direct threat. Large predatory sharks alive today, such as the great white sharks, reach high-end sizes of around 6.1 meters or 20.3 feet and 2 tons. This being dramatically smaller than a full-grown mosasaur. In a direct confrontation, a great white shark would be at a clear disadvantage. It would be far smaller and have far less experience against dealing with something like a mosa. Meanwhile, the giant marine reptile would have the experience dealing with sharks, as well as the size and weaponry required to make them a prey option. Instead, large sharks such as the great white sharks, makos, tigers and even hammerheads would function more as competitors for prey and opportunistic threats to juvenile mosasaurs rather than genuine threats to adults. Marine mammals on the other hand present a far more complex challenge. The primary adversary would come in the form of the orca, with large adults reaching 9.8 meters or 32 feet in length and 10 tons in weight. Orcas rival the mosasaur when it comes to pure size. Not only this, but they surpass the mosa in terms of intelligence and group coordination. A lone large orca may be capable of harassing or wounding a mosasaur, but a coordinated pod could certainly overpower even a large individual. This species would likely present the greatest biological threat in the modern oceans. Another mammal worth considering is the pilot whale. Although significantly smaller, averaging around 7.2 meters or 23 feet and 3.2 tons, pilot whales live in large social pods and are known to aggressively defend themselves and confront potential predators. While like to the orca, a single pilot whale would not pose too serious of a threat to a mosasaur, a large pod could mob or harass a lone mosasaur, particularly over territory or food resources. The presence of medium-sized to large marine mammals would add consistent competitive pressure and occasional defensive aggression, especially in open oceans. A less frequently considered but meaningful competitor, and more importantly threat, would be in the form of the larger whales, particularly the sperm whale. While primarily deep-diving squid hunters and unlikely to actively encounter mosasaurs, adult males can reach over 16 meters or 52 feet in length and weigh over 40 tons. Their sheer size and strength could result in rare but dangerous encounters, particularly if a mosasaur strayed too deep into feeding territories. A confrontation with a large bull whale would be one of the few situations in which a mosasaur would be better off retreating for its own health. Generally, whales can be rather protective and chase off potential threats, and I believe the same would apply here. While not invincible, the Mosasaurus would remain a dominant and resilient apex predator across different regions of ocean. Only coordinated groups of large marine mammals or exceptionally large individual threats would be capable of posing a serious issue to a mature mosa. However, I think the biggest issue would be overcoming the growth curve to reach adulthood. Still, I believe they would maintain a strong position within the ecological hierarchy of the ocean, earning them a resistance to threats and competition score of 7 out of 10. Now, just before we jump into the deep end of the ultimate survival scenario, in this video we have some Spec Evo for these mosasaurs. Big shout out to the best shark YouTuber around, being Sharktoz. Honestly, he's a lifesaver for this, and if you enjoy all things sharks, make sure to check him out. So, over millions of years, Mosasaurus hoffmanni would diverge into a smaller, more agile species, perfectly adapted to a fast-paced coastal world. This would be known as Mosasaurus veloxus, or being provided the common name of the sea wolf. Averaging around 6 to 8 meters or 20 to 26 feet in length and weighing in at around 3 to 4 tons, it abandons the brute strength of its ancestors in favor of a streamlined speed, quick directional control, and higher sensory perception. Unlike the solitary ambush tactics of prehistoric mosasaurs, this species drives on being a cooperative pack hunter, forming groups of 5 to 15 individuals that communicate through subtle body language and low-frequency vocalizations. Veloxus specializes in high-energy pursuit and coordinated harassment, operating much like a marine wolf pack. Hunts often begin by shadowing prey schools or trailing pinnipeds near shorelines. Once a target is selected, whether a seal, swordfish, tuna shoal, or juvenile shark, the group erupts into motion. Some individuals drive prey from the open water, while others surge ahead to cut off escape routes, compressing the area against reef systems or shallow flats. When prey falters or breaks formation, multiple mosasaurs rush in with rapid slashing bites, then peel away to avoid counterstrikes, only to return moments later in relentless rotation. Even hidden prey such as stingrays may be flushed from sand using sweeping tail movements across the sea floor. They would be direct competitors with pilot whales, false killer whales, and dolphins. However, they would stand clear of orchopods. This strategy would allow the species to dominate warm coastal ecosystems as well as open regions, being rich in agile prey and structured hunting terrain. It functions as a meso to apex predator, carving out a niche where speed, endurance and teamwork outweigh raw size, being a sleek coordinated hunter where agility is king. In stark contrast, there would be another path Hoffmanni would go down, resulting in Mosasaurus venatus, being commonly known as the venomous sea dragon. This marine reptile would evolve down the path of power and patience, reaching lengths of 10 to 11 meters or 33 to 36 feet and weights of 7 to 8 tons. It is a heavy-bodied marine ambush predator relying on endurance and stamina rather than a speed blitz. Its defining adaptation is biochemical, this being venom glands that produce anticoagulant compounds paired with serrated teeth designed to shear flesh and maximize bleeding. A single bite delivers both instant trauma and slow-active systemic weakening, mirroring the hunting strategies of the Komodo dragon. Rather than pursuing prey at speed, Venatus prefers stealth and ambush. It drifts just below the surface or waits among turbid waters, lunging forward or laterally with devastating force when prey ventures too close. Targets include medium-sized prey, however it would prefer much larger prey options such as great white sharks, whale sharks, and whales in general. The first strike is almost seldom fatal. Instead, Venatus inflicts deep wounds and retreats, allowing venom, blood loss, and shock to compromise the victim. It then maintains a pursuit, following the trail of weakening animals until exhaustion sets in. Once the prey can no longer defend itself, this mosasaur will either finish the job, or if the prey is larger than itself, await for the venom to do the job. In order to aid in its tracking ability, it would gain a greater sense of smell at the cost of losing a bit of its vision capabilities. This would allow it to be a solid tracker that could follow prey over vast distances. Marine mammals that hunt in pods would persist as an issue, especially if they were smaller and quicker, as this mosasaur would not be fast or agile enough to be able to pick them off. However, as a result of their potent venom, they would be rather avoided by most animals that could pose a real threat. This mosasaur would rule deeper coastal zones, favoring waters where cover and ambush opportunities are plentiful. In ecosystems where patience, power, and physiological weaponry outweigh speed, this venomous mosa stands as an imposing methodical apex predator. Now, technically, would a creature of this size be biologically capable of having such devastating venom? I mean, yeah, it's unlikely, but it's all about the fun of the video, and it's a bit of a shout out back to the old theories that mosasaurs did indeed possess venom. With all the groundwork being laid out, it's time to check out the ultimate survival scenario. If we were to suddenly introduce populations of Hoffmann's mosasaur into modern oceans, what would happen next would be both fascinating and maybe a bit scary. The first step for any introduced species in an alien environment would be to figure out the best habitat to, well, inhabit. Mosasaurs would quickly claim warm, productive waters. Pretty much wherever shallow waters are teeming with life, there would likely be a mosasaur calling it home. Their size and aggression would make them uncontested by most local predators. Large sharks, once apex of these regions, would find themselves regulated to secondary status overnight. With the environment being comfortably settled in, the mosasaurs would begin adapting its ancient predatory strategy to a modern prey base. Unlike in the Cretaceous, it would now face a greater diversity of fast, intelligent, and sometimes social prey. In shallower zones, its ambush tactics would dominate, schools of tuna, marlin, and swordfish being prime targets, being ambushed from below or the side with bursts of speed aided from its powerful fluke. Sea turtles and rays would also form a part of its diet, with their defensive shells or spines offering little resistance against something with such a distinct size advantage. However, what would really test its skill and survivability would be its competition with other predators. Full-grown adults would have few natural threats. Only pods of orcas or the rare overlaps of large sperm whales would pose genuine danger. Orcas in particular, with their group intelligence and communication, would drive a mosasaur away from its feeding grounds or harass it during hunts, much as they do with great whites today. Although in a one-on-one conflict, that would be an entirely different ballpark. I would be confident in taking the mosasaur's side in such an event. Anyways, getting back to hunting, smaller cetaceans such as porpoises or dolphins would likely fall victim to surprise attacks near the surface, although the mosa would struggle against coordinated pods capable of evasive maneuvers. Its size would make it a formidable hunter, but not an infallible one. As mentioned, quick, agile, and intelligent mammals could outpace or confuse them in open water, forcing the mosa to solely rely on ambushes. Younger or smaller individuals would also likely occupy much of the shallow regions, feeding on rays, fish, and crustaceans crustaceans until they reached a size that would make them safe from shark predation. Over time, mosasaur populations would stabilize into distinct ecological niches. This would have to be the case as mosasaurs would not all be capable of living in the coast. Coastal mosasaur populations would likely specialize in ambushing large fish and marine mammals, while those in the open regions would likely act as wide-ranging scavengers and opportunistic hunters, much like the role they once held millions of years ago. There would likely be a reduction in large shark numbers and shifting prey behavior. Obviously though, life wouldn't be a breeze for the typical mosa. Young individuals would struggle to survive to adulthood considering the number of fast predators that roam the 7 seas. Even adults would find it difficult to survive at some point because of the marine mammals. Despite the constraints that exist, mosasaurs would almost certainly establish themselves as one of the ocean's top predators. Eventually, after millions of years, they would adapt and evolve into the 2 species that we call Mosasaurus veloxus and Mosasaurus venatus. These 2 would become effective hunters. And in the end, the Mosasaurus earns an ultimate survival score of 22 out of 30. It would be a living relic from another time. And with that, we've reached the end of the video and I hope you've all enjoyed. As you could imagine, these videos take a bit of work and study to make sure all the facts are as accurate as possible. So if you do enjoy, I would appreciate if you like and subscribed, as well as comment down below what you'd like to see next. Anyways, I'll catch you all in the next video. See ya, mates.